The Loft command is a way for you to create a surface using a series of profile curves. This is not entirely unlike shipbuilding, where you'll create a skeleton or a series of beams across the surface of your ship, and then you'll nail down planks over that to actually create the outer surface that's going to sit in the water. And here's how it works. We simply create some curves. So let me just make a curve like so. And just to keep things nice and simple, I can duplicate the curve. And here's just two curves, but we can come down to Loft. I'll open up the options. Let's make sure everything is reset. And click Loft, and there you go. So we just created a surface. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just two curves. You can make as many curves as you want. A really fun example, and this is one that I really kind of enjoy. We can take a circle. We'll rotate it 90 degrees, and I'll move it over here to the side. We'll scale it up a little bit. I'll group this, and then let's hit Shift-D. We'll rotate this in Y some 30 degrees, and we'll scale it down uniformly by, I don't know, some arbitrary amount. And then we'll just keep hitting Shift-D over here in the viewport. And now I can grab all of these circles. And notice I'm grabbing them in a specific order. I'll talk about that here in just a second. And I can Loft, and I have created a surface from all of those circles. So very cool. Nice little cone, sort of spinny, spirally effect. Anyways, the selection order you choose when using a Loft is very important. For example, if I were to select, say, the first one, third one, second, fourth, and keep skipping around like this, and then maybe let's select this guy again, and just make a bunch of really crazy selections until I have everybody selected. Whoops. And then we go to Surfaces, Loft, like so. Here's the beautiful surface that I get. Not what I would call particularly useful, but kind of interesting in a modern art sort of sense. Also, be aware, because of this, of just total marquee selections where you just grab the whole thing, because that can sometimes lead to predictable results, although I gotta admit, here it seems to work out just fine. Though, as a general rule, do not marquee select your objects. They can just lead to problems such as this. So, let's take a look at some of the settings inside of this command. Open up Loft Options box. First thing we have is parameterization. This will control the final parameterization of your surface, and is a very helpful little addition to the command. Let me start off by creating a NURBS curve. Now, in this case, the placement of this curve is kind of important. You'll notice I put it in the upper right quadrant in my side view. I'll go ahead and duplicate this, and we'll rotate it. And I'll move it a little bit closer here, and then we'll duplicate it, and we'll rotate it again. And I'll move it a little closer, and then we'll duplicate it again and rotate again. So you see I've got this sort of dragon or bat wing look to all of my surfaces. Now what I'm going to do is set my parameterization to chord length. And you guys already know the difference between chord length parameterization or uniform. If not, you should. And if you don't, it is covered in the NURBS workflow videos, so make sure you get those watched. Now I can grab all of these in order and click Apply. And let's go ahead and pull our surface off to the side like so. And then I'll grab them all in the exact same order. I'll switch on Uniform and Apply. So I have two separate surfaces that look exactly the same. Really no difference in between the two. But if I open up my attribute editor, this first surface has a parameterization of 0 to 19.906. It is using chord length parameterization to get the distance between the lofts. And this one, of course, is nicely organized into number of spans, so I have 0 to 3. In every single case that I've ever used, I will go ahead and use my uniform parameterization and not worry about using chord length. So just from me to you, that's what I'd do if I were you. Now, you can also auto-reverse a curve. This is very handy. Let me come in here back to the side view, and I'll create another EP curve. Watch this. The first curve, I'll create left to right. The second curve, I'll create right to left. And if I were to come in here to the perspective view, select the two curves, and switch off auto-reverse, click Apply, notice how they get twisted. If you switch auto-reverse on, Maya will automatically reverse one curve or the other to make sure you do not get a twisted surface. So it's just a nice little automatic feature to keep problems from appearing down the road. Also very handy if you're lofting a series of circles and maybe one of the circles happens to be spun around 180 degrees. You can choose to close a surface. Let me create a circle again, And let's see. Let's start off by scaling the circle out a bit. I'll duplicate it. We'll move it up and scale it out a little bit. I'll duplicate it again, move it up, scale it in, duplicate again, move up, scale in a little bit more. Again, this time we'll just pull back. Actually, maybe to about midway, and I'll scale this in. Duplicate again, and I'll pull this down to the bottom and a little bit past the bottom like so. Now, I'm going to select these in a very specific order, so kind of keep an eye on this. I'll hide the grid out because maybe it'll make things a little easier. I'm going to start off at the bottom on the outside, then the next outside, then switch over to these inside circles. So you can see my loft goes from the outside back inward. And if I were to simply open up my loft options and just loft this out, here's what we end up with. Sort of a jet engine or a vase look. But notice that the surface is open once you get down to the bottom. What you can do is switch on close, and what's going to happen is the surface will close itself up. So in effect, what I have created here is very much like a torus. So it's closed from one end to the other. So very, very handy to have a loft of that nature. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with circles. I could, for example, maybe just come over here to the side view once again. So we have one circle like so. Let's go ahead and maybe pull it up a little bit. Let me show my grid again so I don't get too confused as to where I am in 3D space. I'm going to snap the pivot of this grid back down to the origin, like so. And let's just duplicate this curve around a few times. So let's see, what did I just rotate that to in Z? 38 degrees, let's say 45 degrees. And make sure that stays at 45 degrees, thank you. And we'll hit Shift-D a few times. So I have this nice loop of circles, or I'm sorry, of curves. And let's select these in order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. We'll go back to surfaces, loft. Notice I still have close check, so I can click apply. And it doesn't close on both ends. If the circle wasn't closed to begin with, it's not going to close everything up. It's only closing in the direction of the loft. So just something for you to be aware of. All right, from here you can control the surface degree, whether it is linear or cubic. So I could probably demonstrate that here just as easily. So let's grab our curves again. This time we'll switch over to linear and click apply, and of course we get a nice linear blocky surface. We can also control the number of spans along the surface. Now watch out, make sure my selection order doesn't get all messed up. We can control this section spans. In fact, what I'm going to do, instead of changing that inside the window, notice when you create an object, you do get a loft input node, so you can change this after the fact, and everything you see in here can be altered. So we can increase the section spans, so you can put basically an extra span in between wherever each curve was used. Like so, because if you take a close look, like if I were to move this back down to its original location, you'll notice that each curve corresponds to an isoparm on the existing surface, and that's because we're set to one section span. So if you set this to 2, we double that, 3, we triple it, and so on. And that's pretty much all of the options for this tool. Now, I do want to mention just like one simple workflow issue involving the loft, and that is that sometimes you can get unpredictable surfaces. The algorithm used to create this surface is not entirely unlike the algorithm used for the EP curve tool. Here's what I mean. Let me start off by creating an EP curve, just a simple one that flows straight across the grid in a straight line like so. And I'll hide the grid for simplicity's sake on the viewport. Let's go ahead and hit Shift-D, and I'll move this up just a little bit. Shift-D, and I'll just make several copies of this. Now I'm going to grab one of these, and I'll duplicate it and slide it way in and maybe up just a tad. So I have this little kind of indentation. Now let's say I wanted to loft from here to here to here, back into this crevice, and then back up like so. Now off the top of my head, I'm probably expecting this to be a straight line and then dip in here, come back out, and then be a straight line on the way up. I know that's probably what I'd be expecting if I were doing the modeling. You can kind of test this, although it's sort of a long way to go about it, if you grab the EP curve tool and you curve snap to the ends of this curve. You see what's happening? We're sort of breaking that continuity. Instead of being a straight line and dipping back in, we're actually waving out so that we can get nice, smooth, flowing tangency from one end to the other. So let's just do a quick loft test. If I select these curves in the same order in which I created that curve, and we'll go to Surfaces, Loft. Now let me check my options. I'll go ahead and just reset everything, and let's Loft. And check it out. That surface exactly matches up with that curve that I created by snapping to the ends of those curves. So it's using that exact same algorithm. That's kind of cool, but again, maybe not what we're expecting, because we would like this to be straight and then just have an indentation. If you run into such a situation, what I do is I select my curves up to the point where I know I want that change in shape to occur, and we create a loft, then continue until I get to another change in surface, create the loft again, continue till I get another change in surface, create a new loft, and then go ahead and continue, and I don't have any more changes in surface, so I can just go ahead and loft all this together. Now this is a very linear sort of result here, so now I can simply grab these two surfaces, come down to Edit NURBS, Attach Surfaces, and I'll switch to Blend and make sure I'm inserting a knot to keep a little bit of that detail tight, and there you go. So you have a nice rounded attachment point there. We'll do the same thing here, and the same thing here. And when I'm done, just delete out my history. And there you go. So this may be a little more like what you had in mind, with a surface that goes up, dips in, and comes back out. And all I had to do was just separate the loft and then attach all the surfaces together. So that is going to wrap up everything for this video. Definitely play with the Loft Surfaces command. You'll be using this in a lot of different ways the more you get into modeling. So it's one of those things where unless you play with it and get used to using it, you may completely overlook a moment when you could really use it to save yourself a lot of time. So that'll wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot.